What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Yours Truly podcast. I'm your host, Christian Baxter, and today we'll be talking to Eric Benjamin. Eric is works at a megachurch in Southern California, and was recently on one of Paul Vanderklay's randos. And I thought over the last year or so, after going to Symbolic World, when I saw Ruslan and John from What Do You Mean had been invited to Symbolic World Summit, I saw Ruslan start talking about Jordan Peterson. I thought this is the next turning for this thing where evangelicalism pretty much embraces the Peterson phenomenon. And you see how much more mainstream he is. Paul Vanderklay talks about the marketplace of ideas. And when I see his advertisements, like his highly polished Daily Wire advertisements, Jordan Peterson's, being like on a Facebook feed or something like that, I just see a new way in which his ideas are going to be introduced into the mainstream, to maybe something like more normie culture. And not that Eric's been paying attention for several years as per his conversation with Paul Vanderklay, but I just wanted to further that conversation about evangelicalism related to the Peterson-Peugeot pipeline and what happens and what does it mean when you encounter his ideas and you don't go into the normal high church drift, but how those ideas are going to affect evangelicalism. And in my recent conversations with Luke Freeman and Ethan Kahi and Matt Skankenstein on our roundtable discussion, this is one of the themes that I've been kind of poking at and tacking along. So don't forget today to like and subscribe if you want to help support what's going on here at Yours Truly Podcast. And if you want to support it financially, become a channel member. There will be a link in the description. Channel members get early access to podcast previews, kind of get to see what's coming down the pipe. And so do that if you want to help support the channel. So without any further delay, we're going to be talking to Eric Benjamin today. I look forward to it. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. All right, Eric, we're recording. I always want to say we're live, but it's kind of not exactly
right. Not exactly live.
So you recently did a rando with Paul Vanderklay, and wanted to kind of bat some ideas around with him. You, in that story, you talk about how I think you work at a mega church down in Southern California.
No, I don't work there. My dad is the senior pastor.
Your dad's the pastor. You help do ministry there at the church.
I am frequently volunteering. I'm heavily involved. Yeah, I'm just not on staff. Not at the moment. I have been before, but not.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah,
but you're in that ethos, but it's a family endeavor for you.
Absolutely.
Which is a different dynamic than just attending a church. That's,
Yeah. So. Yeah. We have been there since I was a little kid. And so, I grew up there. I think I shared this story in the conversation with Paul about sort of seeing the buildings. We moved from this building to that building, and, me as a little kid having the memory of writing verses on the foundations of the bigger building and things like that. And it is a family endeavor. As I said, I'm not on staff, but I'm heavily involved. My wife is heavily involved. My folks, they host like young adults every Friday night at their house, like every week of the year. So, I mean, it's like, it is definitely a communal effort on our part as a family. That we are a part of the church. And so, I love my church, and hopefully I represented that well in my conversation with Paul.
I think so. I think so. And I think that's in this corner of the internet, a lot of the early manifestations of people's spiritual and religious moves were, either from like coming out of evangelicalism and coming in either, or maybe just maybe you were Catholic or something, and then you were an atheist, and then the Peterson thing, and then you find yourself back in, and there's
Right.
kind of been that kind of pattern, less of a and because of the kind of, I would say, at least in like the online personal relationship with Jesus world, there was already a big familiarity with what big Eva kind of Baptist low church culture had offered Christians of millennials and Gen X age. Like, for that was pretty familiar. And so it's like, well, what's all this new stuff related to this meaning, related to some of the biblical language that Peterson offered. And when I said this in the intro, which you didn't hear, I already recorded, but when I went to Symbolic World last year, to the summit, they had invited Ruslan and John from What Do You Meme to attend.
Interesting. I didn't know
And
that.
I had already seen that Ruslan had been kind of doing some Jordan Peterson commentary, like over like last like Christmas a year ago, like that time. Peugeot had gone on Russell Brand's podcast. Like there was kind of these things starting to bubble up. And I kind of took that as, oh, this is going to be really interesting now. And even Ruslan was on a few Peterson stops, on his last tour.
Right.
And so I was like, this kind of is a signal to me that they're starting to play in the evangelical marketplace. Paul calls it the marketplace of Christian marketplace of ideas. And, with your background, and I would also say in this corner, this is kind of my introduction to you to kind of like frame what I was interested in the most.
Yeah.
Like I come from a Baptist background. I got like an undergrad in Baptist theology and was raised like a First Baptist Church type thing. Then was non-denom for almost 15 years. And so very familiar with that world too. And was also on like I did like itinerant camp ministry and worked with, big Baptist publisher for doing some of their contract stuff. So it's like, so what I'm trying to say is, I've been kind of watching and waiting to see what this next iteration of, and then Paul brings up the metagelical word like 8 months ago.
Yeah.
So I'm meeting you there, and I'm just want to continue that conversation of what do you think it means for this stuff to be more brought into the mainstream, more expressed, and these ideas to come into those spaces, and how do you think it will continue to impact and affect?
Yeah, I think it depends on the idea, number one, because there's a diversity of the kinds of things that are spoken of within the TLC, within the Jordan Peterson sphere, within the symbolic world. Like there's a number of different things that they present that have different tiers, I would say, as far as how they will penetrate the public. You know what I mean? Some will land better than others. I can only speak from my experience and within my own body, my church body. But I do know that as far as the people that I am surrounded by, it's very interesting how the Jubilee thing has shut a lot of people off to Jordan Peterson, even just in the last, I don't even know how long ago that was, like a month or two ago. Yeah. And the amount of, I mentioned in my conversation with Paul Vanderklay that I have like an online community. It's just mostly local people. It's on Discord and things like that. And yeah, the sort of back and forth when that came out was people were dunking on Jordan Peterson. And so for me, this is sort of an aside, but I wonder how that will stunt sort of the integration of some of these ideas into sort of the evangelical sphere, if he is portrayed as someone who doesn't really get it because he's using all these words that are, not our words, if that makes sense. But to get to the heart of what your point was, I guess I would counter and ask the question, like, what ideas do you think are the ones that should be integrated in evangelical, even coming from your own experience? What hole do you see like the ideas that these figures are filling, right? What ideas should be and shouldn't be left behind. And there's a number of different ideas that I think, but I guess I want to know where you're coming from in regard to that too.
Okay. Well, the main one for me was this, like I had a personal experience with like an Old Testament symbol, Abraham's dagger,
Okay.
that like in a kind of very low state in my life, like in 2016, that image all of a sudden was true to me in a way about what it meant that I was going to have to like sacrifice a type of well-being. And it may even cost my family. It may cost my marriage. It may cost that for the sake of telling the truth.
I see.
And so for one, there's like the whole truth telling part of confession. So confession is an idea related to that. But then two, is the fact there's obviously then there's symbol, but it's also I began to ask the question because I was raised evangelical. I was like the kid that knew all the Sunday school answers. My dad did bivocational and vocational ministry, and my mom was raised. We did like felt boards at home and scripture memory, like all that. Why in the lowest of state did a story that's at least 3,000 years old? How does it do that? And that was it's not just it's not just a story in the facts that there's a good lesson to learn. You should, it was like, it came to me out of some subconscious Holy Spirit experience. And the only people that really were able to articulate the experience that I had were like these people. And so, that's where I'm coming from.
Gotcha. Okay.
And it's like a personal thing, but then like, as I was in ministry, and then in 2016 I was out of ministry. I was fired, and I was for moral failure. There's all sorts of ways to say that, but that's the coded one. But it's like, and I've talked explicitly about that. I'm not trying to hide anything. I'm just trying to move on.
No, I understand.
And so then as the personal responsibility that he was preaching at that time was very important to me. And then as I was trying to rebuild my life from zero, basically. And so that's one thing. And again, I don't know if that'll come through. When you were talking about that, I was wondering, well, are there secondary voices that could be more clear? Maybe voices from Christians that did absorb that stuff, where that comes from.
Yeah.
And then just that that there's value, like the word myth carried it was a loaded word 10 years ago. Like, oh my gosh, like boom, storytelling is like that myth actually has like real value. Yeah. And even stories are powerful. And both of these guys were saying these things, and that we're held together by that stuff, and and that they carry real power. And I think that you may be familiar with the kind of like the words like gospel centered, or sometimes like that meta narrative kind of diminishes the role of story a little bit. It's like there's only one story, and of course that's the ultimate story. That's like the deepest story, but that there's like layers of that in these. Like when Peterson's like walking through the Genesis or something, and then with Peugeot, and they did those Daily Wire projects, but it's like what they're bringing out symbolically and practically. Yeah, I hope that some of that stuff will continue to get in to the bones of the church, but I don't know. That's where I'm coming from. That was a long answer. So
no. I understand where you're coming from now. So the idea that these patterns are manifest throughout the biblical narrative, they also manifest in your own life. Yeah. These same sorts of symbols, these same sort of patterns. Yeah. In a way, there are typologies in our own lives that like reflect the web of patterns that you see in the Bible, whether it's an individual story or the meta story or whatever, and how that is different perhaps from a Sunday school upbringing that is like, here's like the takeaway, right? Here's the takeaway, and here's how you apply it. And there you go. You figured out the story, right?
And that story was there because of that. Like it's like two-edged thing because, like, well, I had that story inside of me,
Mm-hmm.
like from cartoons and from
Yeah.
Sunday. So there is that part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost like you could like tell that story. I don't think I was ever given the lesson that I got in a like a what's that when solicited way, you know, like, but that was something that I was like kind of taught directly, like an application from this, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Usually the application was, well, he believed that Isaac could raise from the dead like Christ, and Christ is the ram. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to diminish, like, my Christology is high. I have higher incarnate, but
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't exactly what happened for me. So
Mm-hmm.
that was so curious for me and I didn't, and again, like that's one aspect. Like I said, there were all sorts of things going on, but as I kind of healing took place, that began to be kind of the question that took place in more for me. So that's where I'm coming from. And my question back to you is, so in being in the, I don't know what to call it, mainstream evangelical sphere or something like,
You could call
what,
it that.
yeah, like, do, do you think those ideas will continue to penetrate that space, or will it just be more some kind of pragmatic would maybe be the alternative?
Mm. So there are two levels to Bible analysis for me. There is the level of let's identify what is the story and where does it fit in the pattern, in the grand pattern. And then there's the question of where does this reflect on an experience that I've had, an experience that I'm having, or then an experience that I may have. Those are sort of two different questions, if that makes sense. And I don't know if you agree with that. But what I find someone like Jordan Peterson is doing is the latter of those two things that I just said. Is let's identify. I mean, the whole point of his lectures is the psychological significance of the Bible. He's not talking from a historical cultural background. I mean, he brings some stuff in from sort of ancient worldview stuff. He doesn't bring in, let's exegete the scripture. You know what I mean? Like, let me show you about Jesus in the Old Testament. Let me show you about,
Right.
the doctrines that are being portrayed through here. He's saying, let's look at how this story is reflecting an experience that you may have had, you may be having, and
Existential.
existential part of it. Yeah. This is ironic that I'm in this space, that I'm having this conversation, because I really appreciate that side of things personally. I do, like, my nerdy heart is for the first thing that I said. And so I have I have my own series of biblical classes that I'm doing on Sunday mornings, and then I'm publishing the videos for, and a lot of that I'm trying to bring out the patterns, but trying to connect them to the mega pattern so people can enlighten themselves to the scriptures, to see it for what it is and be comfortable with it, not just feel like it's just completely lost to them, a huge mystery. If they're in the story of Abraham, just since we're on that one, the story of Abraham and the binding of Isaac, right? When it comes to, do we integrate the story of Abraham, the binding of Isaac, and the sacrifice that Abraham is called to make? How do we integrate that into our own lives? And is that being preached on a Sunday morning? Just, this is the example that you're giving, because you said that Old Testament symbol it spoke to you, right?
Yeah.
And it was something that you felt like you were inhabiting.
Yep.
You were like, am I getting you right to say, like, oh, I see that story differently now because I'm living that story?
Yeah. In a moment,
Right.
in a very singular moment. Yep.
I'm actually walking that story out.
Yes.
I don't know if my experience is different. I'll just say that. I don't know if my experience is different or this is conventional, but I feel like we at our church have had that
Good.
without the former. Does that make sense? So we have had the level of, here is what this story will look like in your life. Does that make sense? Without the, here's how the story is situated in the grand narrative. Okay. And so if you're asking me, do I see a place for that? Obviously, it's not on the level of Jordan Peterson. It's not on the level of the language that Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Pageau that they're using is very high bar language, right? It's very scholarly, or it's very intellectual language. But if we bring it down to a very personal level, the idea of identifying these stories as patterns that are manifesting even in your own life, right? And that it's not just that you are taking away a moral of the story, but that the story is actually penetrating you in such a way that
That it's
now
true.
that it's true,
Yeah.
not just because it's in the text, but it's
In
true
history.
because in history,
Yeah.
yeah, it's true because look at it manifesting in your life, right?
Yep.
Look at that it's happened now to you, right? I don't know. I think that there's something to be said that we have taught that way before. And I find, for my experience, oftentimes when I hear people, and this might not be what you're wanting to hear, but when I hear
That's okay.
people, yeah, when I hear people talk about these new ways, um, for me, they don't always feel like new ways of looking at things. Um, I feel like it's nearly the opposite for me. The new way for a lot of people, at least in our church, is seeing how those stories fit together,
Mm.
if that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. If
Yeah.
like I was probably in a, a young Gen X, and then like the young restless and reformed movement, they were kind of into, with the creation, fall, redemption, restoration, like there is like this
Hey,
meta narrative, and like,
yeah,
so like I could see
that's
how
it.
if that hasn't been like a part of that, that's a helpful
Uh-huh.
uh binding agent. And I mean, even I think that's another thing that Peterson actually talks about, is kind of a
Yeah.
meta narrative for
Right.
all of reality, and then even
Absolutely.
the cosmic image and all that kind of stuff.
Uh-huh.
So I think that's a part of it.
It's
So
funny because
yeah.
you bringing that up, creation, fall, redemption, restoration, when I teach that, when I've quoted that, cited that directly in my classes, I find that that's a novel concept
Mm-hmm.
to the people that I'm speaking to.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're saying that you're coming from, that was more, it's almost the inversion. You see what I'm
Yeah.
saying? The
Yeah.
idea of identifying a way to, or a lens through which we can see the entire point of the scripture. People have not felt that way where I'm coming from, if that makes sense.
Well,
So
that's interesting because the way that we're talking about, and those saying something like meta narrative, is not how the
you're right.
young restless and reformed, or
Okay.
we're talking about that,
Okay.
or the kind of, I guess, Pageauian language of like the cosmic image
Mm-hmm.
of these types of things, like transcending time, like all of truth. So it's like you would hear something like, this is a timeless truth, like more
Gotcha.
kind of a saccharine kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. So I think I hear what you're saying, that there has, in both of these frames that we've been talking about, I guess what I would say, in a certain sense, they are like they're like in a theological layer, and then there's, I don't know, there's, like you were kind of saying, psychological or existential or philosophical. I would say maybe those are some of the things I'm wondering if they take more like across the board
Mm-hmm.
in settings that haven't used those, I don't know if tools are the right words, or those
Mm-hmm.
frames at near as much. I guess that would be the
Something I've tried to drive home really intensely, even just this past weekend. I was teaching on Genesis chapter 3 in the fall, and it might be true that a conventional understanding of the fall is that this is something that happened at one point in time, and that's sort of that, right?
yeah.
And I keep trying to tell everyone that it's presenting an experience that you have on the regular. And it's showing you how that experience can go or not go if it goes a different direction. Let's say you're Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane rather than Adam, the first Adam in the garden on Mount Eden, right? So it's like, and I have tried to present that especially in a lot of these early chapters, with Genesis 1 to 11, where they're less historically located. I find those are much richer, or more available to have this kind of way of talking about the Bible and talking about the biblical stories, as applied patterns that will appear in your own lives or in your own experience. Sorry, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Yeah. So I find that Genesis 1 to 11, it's easier to do that than some of these other, but not so much, because you do find even the same patterns of the Bible, that show up in Genesis, they'll show up in 1st and 2nd Kings, and then they're ultimately fulfilled in Jesus, of course. But I guess the point is, like, even as we're getting into the story of Cain and Abel this next weekend, I'm going to be doing the same exact thing. I'm going to be talking about what, the typical Jordan. I mean, he was so focused on Cain and Abel, right? And in preparation, I've been watching some Jonathan Pajot takes on Cain and Abel, about that being a pattern that will manifest in your life. And so I'm attempting to hold both, because I find that holding both, what I don't like, and I think I understand what you're getting at, is when these stories, when these patterns, they're presented in a sort of trite way, when they're presented in a way that is, as you said, this is just a timeless truth. You know what I mean? Like, and that's just simply that, right? And it's not being driven home that it's not that like it's a timeless truth and you just sort of look at it and you just sort of appreciate that it's a timeless truth, but it's a timeless truth that will at one point or another be something that you run into.
It will happen to you.
It will happen to you, right? And when Jonathan Pajot talks about the pattern of reality, that's something that I hold to myself very intensely. The idea that these patterns, they manifest not just in what the Bible is doing, is it is enlightening you to the patterns of reality that you will experience in your life.
So to answer my question on how is this going to influence, the evangelical church, it's like, well, Eric's doing it.
I suppose. I mean, the point is, it is happening.
Yeah.
Right. It is happening. Things are changing in real time. The effect of Jordan Peterson, the effect of Jonathan Pajot. You might not agree with this, but something that my first thought to answer your question, and then I refrained because I wasn't sure how it would fit, was to bring up something like Tim Mackey and the Bible Project.
That's fun.
Yeah. Do you know about them?
I do. I'm not like super, I don't follow, I know about it, and I know it's been super influential, incredibly influential.
I think they bridged that gap personally, because they're always, in their animated videos, they're always talking meta-narrative, right? Mm-hmm. But then in their podcasts, they're always talking about, again, this is a pattern that will recur throughout the scripture, and this is a divine pattern. This is a pattern that will appear in your life, things like that.
I almost feel like I've heard there's kind of like Tim Mackey to, gosh, who's the guy that just passed away? The Divine Council, or
Michael Heiser.
Like a Mackey to Heiser kind of pipeline to Orthodox type thing. That's
also, there is. It's interesting. I find that Sam Tiedemann, he interviewed Tim Mackey, and so I find almost that pipeline is almost TLC adjacent, Heiser, and because of I think what we're talking about, I think probably both of them take this very sophisticated approach to the scripture to say, like, ancient Near Eastern background, and here's how they saw things, but not in like a critically scholar way, not like we're skeptical of, like, we're presenting all this, like, this sort of biased approach that none of this actually happened or anything like that, or doesn't, you know what I mean? That none of this is actually applied, that this is all fake. Someone just made this up,
Right.
They take the approach of, we're going to take serious scholarship, in regards to like how the ancient people viewed things, but then they will apply it in such a way that says like this is a, like there's a video called their video on the concept of the idea of the exile that is found throughout the Bible, the exile from the garden, the exile from the land of Israel to Babylon. I think the title of the video is an applied title. It's like, this is why you always have this feeling. You know what I mean? Like the idea of exile, or I don't know if that's the exact title, you know what I mean? But it's the idea that look at this pattern, look at this this narrative that's in the story of the scripture, and look at how that manifests in your life, you know what I mean? And things like that. So I think that they are all kind of moving together. Someone like Jordan Peterson or Jonathan Pageau or Tim Mackey, which is on more of the evangelical.
Yeah.
They're very tailored toward the non-denominational evangelical, scene. They are also the marketplace of ideas. Yeah, they are also presenting things in that way. Yeah. I struggle myself sometimes with how Jordan Peterson presents things.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Just because I've got the poster doesn't mean I can't be a critic. Yeah.
I've listened to him constantly. I'm not saying I've listened to hours and hours as we all have. I do struggle with how someone commented in the Paul Vanderklay video about how I was criticizing Rick Warren for how he was saying the thieves on the cross, they represent the political left and right, and Jesus is in the middle. Someone commented on that in response to my statement and said, doesn't Jordan Peterson do that exact thing all the time? Essentially the same sort of thing, right? And so I personally, as much as I appreciate the way that he talks about things, not as much Jonathan Pageau, but Peterson in particular, for some reason I feel like he hasn't lost the plot. He's never genuinely got it to a certain extent. And I don't know if you feel that way.
I mean, I think it's the way I kind of look at it is our culture. I come at it from a little different angle. Mm-hmm. Our culture with like, a couple of things have happened. I was thinking about this the other day because my father-in-law would always be like, the Homer Simpsoning of America, like, about the man and the patriarchy and all this, what media has been tried to do. Mm-hmm. And you can't separate what happened with Peterson. A lot of people, when you first start talking about it, it's like, yeah, I wasn't into his political stuff, but I was loving his, it's like, right. Okay, whatever. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You weren't one of the watch Jordan Peterson owns the blah, it's like, so what I'm trying to say though, is during that time of the core of the phenomenon, pre and post sickness, withdrawal, everything, mm-hmm. Our culture was in such a, we were in such a reactionary moment in mm-hmm. the culture that I think Jordan Peterson had that plot better figured out or something. So mm-hmm. It's like, you couldn't, now that we're on the other side of that pendulum swing, you're left with just the Peterson, the biblical lecture Peterson, because the other stuff's already kind of, it's beyond him now.
He's still trying to figure it out, and I just feel like he hasn't gotten it yet.
So there's that, and the other side, which I would agree with in a way that way, but is that what I was trying to also get at is what the boomers and Xers didn't realize in a certain way that they were doing whenever they were like tearing down, any reason to honor your elders mm-hmm. 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. Now they're all elders. Mm-hmm. And it's like we are, and they expect people to respect them, and nobody respects elders.
Right.
I kind of think it's countercultural to like, it's why even though he's not popular, he's lost a lot of popularity. I'm not going to take the poster down.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But you understand, like, because I think it's like, he had a significant impact, helped me from a distance, however all that stuff works in this world. But, mm-hmm. And this whole phenomenon that I'm now involved in is like kind of downstream from all that. I'm okay with that. Even if it's like cringe, boomer, whatever people want to say. I kind of want to rebel against that in a kind of way that's like, I think it's okay to respect those that have gone before us type thing.
Absolutely.
And
I
so
agree.
that's where yeah, I agree on, like, it's like, dude, Peterson's lost the plot. I don't hear you saying that, but I'm, like, that
Right.
that part of our culture is very prevalent. And so that's as far as like on the cultural side of him and everything. And yeah, I think that, as he moves through these, if they end up doing like Revelation, and I mean,
Yeah.
how can you do the psychological significance of Revelation?
I know. I'm scared about that personally. Just simply because when I said, I didn't say that he lost the plot
Okay.
in any respect, in any disrespect.
Right. Right.
And I don't even think he lost it. I was saying, when it comes to, and my Protestant bias is going to show here.
You're talking to one, by the way.
Okay,
So
you're right. You're Presbyterian, right?
yeah.
Okay, right. I watched your parish driving around
Oh,
the
cool.
video. Yeah. Yeah. So I was, and I watched the videos that you sent me too. Yeah, I listened to
Okay.
those. Yeah. So I've got a sort of starter frame.
Background. Yeah.
Yeah. I meant more that the fact that in the Jubilee thing, he was not able to answer the question in any way that is satisfactory, in my opinion, of what is a Christian.
Yeah.
That's a important question if you're going to have like half of your audience and half of your subject matter on everything that you say be in the sphere of Bible and Christianity.
Yep.
You see what I'm saying? And I feel more I have more emotional than intellectual response to that.
That makes sense.
If that makes sense. And
Yeah.
that's why I wasn't trying to say that I wasn't trying to be disrespectful. I feel sad for him because I find, how can you define Christianity without mentioning Christ
Yeah.
in that definition?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And like, that was concerning for me. So again, when we go into the Revelation thing, he takes this perspective, and I feel like there was a moment that he almost got there. And of course, it's the famous crying moment where he almost got there, and he starts to see Christ as someone outside of himself. And he starts to see Christ as a person that, he says, sometimes the narrative world
Touches
and
the metaphor. Yeah.
the physical world touch, right? And he says, I probably believe that, but I don't know what that would be if that were true, or what that would mean if that were true, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, the truth is the fact that like the Christians think that that they do speak to a person, and that they're going to be walking with this person one day, that they do walk with him, but that he will save them. You see what I'm saying? Like, not just save them in the present, but that like he's coming.
Yeah.
And that like genuine like assurance of hope is something that, again, like, it's hard for me to really, I don't want all of that to say, I see good in the way that he talks about things. I also lack a feeling of I have a feeling of remorse that like I don't want us to just turn this into a Christians are those who find the heaviest thing that they can carry, and carry it, is what he said to that person. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, yes, that is what Christ did. He was God. He is God, and yes, that's what he told us to do, right? To follow after him and do that thing and carry our cross. I don't know if that resonates with you at
Well,
all.
it's interesting. Like, I think the interesting kind of back and forth, the thing that was making me think towards the end is like in my spiritual journey, I think I needed a more incarnational view of Christ present
Yeah.
than
Okay.
like when your whole like dispensationalist upbringing, or your when we all get to heaven, what a place, like when that's kind of the teleology of your religious experience, that it's hard to ground, you know, your kingdom come, your will be done here on earth as it is in heaven. Like, so there would that for me, like,
you grew up dispensational.
Yeah, I read all the
so
Left Behind. So
see, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I grew up not dispensational.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's interesting how our opinions on what is necessary is formed by our upbringings. You know what I mean? And so it's like, it is a little,
which is a
interesting
psychological reality in a certain way, like related to this. But it is interesting to kind of hear these kind of, in this big tent that we've been kind of discussing or whatever, like how you can have like these kind of different, you know, what these things do psychologically or spiritually in your formation, and what we, I guess, we then try to offer the world back something, you know, what we didn't have. I don't know if there was more you were wanting to say on whatever topic we're on, because I don't even know what
there is, only in the sense that I guess there is something, and I don't, again, man, I hope I'm not triggering anybody. I love your poster, and I saw Jordan Peterson live when he came to my town. I'm all about Jordan Peterson.
I don't care. Okay. Just bring it out.
He has a sort of impulse toward, man, this might sound whack to some people. He has a sort of impulse toward a Christ consciousness, New Age spirituality that I find is expressed in the way that he talks about Jesus. And I suppose I even bring this up because I just was sitting down for 3 hours yesterday with a gentleman who just started coming to our church, who was all into Carl Jung and Jordan Peterson and all these things, and also is into Christ consciousness. And the idea that we enlighten ourselves to what Jesus represents, right, is different than the Holy Spirit comes and enlightens you and dwells within you because of what he did. There's the verticality of that is very different. And he is always talking about something that I've loved about Paul's commentary is Paul is critical of the building Jacob's ladder and ascending Jacob's ladder language that Jordan Peterson uses. And last thing, and it's also, again, I'm trying not to come off too savage in my application of the symbols here.
Well, no, I think, I mean, it comes best from people that, in a sense, like, have followed it close enough, but also, like, the other question, I guess, I didn't know if I caught this really from you, was like, it didn't sound like you had like some kind of like deep deconstructive personal experience, maybe.
Not in any explicit, even to my own self-conscious.
Yeah.
I mean, in high school, there were times where I could say I was constructing, questioning, and looking for answers to things. I think that that's natural. My upbringing was so loose, I would say, theologically, that things on like Young or Old Earth, things on end times, all this stuff, it was all marginal. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It was all, and even in high school, my dad, he handed me a journal to write prayers in. This is after I already said that I wanted to do what he was doing, that I saw him do in the mornings. Wow. You see what I'm saying? What I saw him do as I was getting ready for school, I'm like, I'll emulate that. You know, he handed me a prayer journal, and I read the Gospels and the Psalms over and over again for my high school years. Wow. Right. And so I never deconstructed, because it was really just, and I have those prayer journals. It was just deeply intimate, I would say, if that makes sense. It wasn't this head stuff, rapture, young earth, old earth, are there dinosaurs in the Garden of Eden? You know what I mean? Like these concepts, like that was never something that I found myself ever even running into, were questions like that. So when it came,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, sorry, you keep going where you're going. Sorry.
So when it comes down to, was there anything even to deconstruct? That's my question. Like, was there anything that I needed to deconstruct? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
In these ways of talking about things that might be harmful to some people in their upbringing, and then, so going to just go straight back to the Jordan Peterson thing, I love the way that he talks about things. I love the psychological significance of the Bibles. I listen to all those lectures. I haven't listened to the Exodus series. I didn't listen to the Gospels, but I listened to clips and I listened to Paul Vander Clay comment on them and things like that. The one thing is that I find challenging for me is that lack of intimacy that I perceive of relationality between Peterson and Jesus, if that makes sense. It's almost like Jesus manifests within you when you decide to pick up your cross. You know what I mean? And like in a sense, that's right. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. In a sense that's true. You know what I mean? But like, there's also the lack of like, again, the relationality. There was an amazing.
You aren't just inhabiting an archetype.
Right. Exactly.
You're following. You're following the person of God.
Yeah, and you are, but you aren't just. It's like it's like the reverse of what they say. What he says. Sorry, it's like it's not just a story. It's a thing that like is in your life, and like I agree with that. But I think we need to hold both. And there's something that there was a conversation between Jordan Hall, Jonathan Pajot, and John Vervaeke that happened months ago. That was I highly appreciated it, because the end part of the question of the conversation was Jordan Hall and Jonathan Pajot asking John Vervaeke, essentially what do you think God thinks about you?
Yeah.
And does God have a relationship with you?
I remember that.
And John Vervaeke didn't get why that would be relevant. He said, why is that relevant? And I was like, and I don't even necessarily have the words to articulate how that makes me feel, if that makes sense. But again, as someone who, in my opinion, my faith is formed by relationship, that a two-way relationship, not a one-way relationship to transcendence, but a two-way relationship of transcendence to me. You see what I'm saying?
Well, that's condescending. There's a coming to
incarnation, right? Exactly. That I find is like the entire point. It's like that God meets me, that like he comes to me, and so I don't build a tower, he comes to me,
That's that. Well, that whenever you said that about John Vervaeke, it took me back to what you had said about Jacob's Ladder. Like it was kind of this. The only journey to God is to him, and that's not really that's not really what the Bible teaches. Like the Bible teaches that God came to us. I mean, that's been the cosmic pattern of
and
Moses
he comes he almost, as long as creation has existed, he has been coming. What I mean? The word proceeds from the Father. You know what I mean? Like,
well, yes, and that I find interesting too, because John is just finishing up a pilgrimage with that he was led by Jonathan Pajot on. Like he's been in the I don't know, Greece, Hungary area, and Jonathan has been his guide on a type of a pilgrimage that he's been on, and he actually live streamed today like his experience with this. Someone that works for the Vervaeke lectures, whatever, was like kind of doing a check in on him and stuff, and that it's interesting because there's like what you're saying is it always just a perpetual journey on the road, like the Silk Road, or in just lining up with the archetype, like I'm always, but it's some the unbelievable reality, I guess, in the most significant way you could portray it maybe is but that God said he must wash your feet.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, well, and let me ask you personally, if you're willing to share, like you said that the pattern of Abraham's dagger, manifest in your life, right?
Yep.
Does that, by saying that, do you mean that God met you in your life?
100%. Well, I mean,
Right.
it was truth, and I
Right.
can't separate. And in my understanding, in John where Christ says, "I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life. No one comes to the Father but through me." That's where that leads me. Like I don't know how to.
Yeah.
You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And so, like to me, that is Christ. Like that is the.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
It has probably not in certain ways felt as personal, like when I was in high school doing devotional type, that kind of, I haven't been as much in that frame as much because because that part of my life seemed to not work for real well. And it's not.
Yeah, I don't do personal devotions as much either. I would like to.
Well, I don't even I'm the parts say that I would take from Vervaeke's genius though is the amount of emphasis that he puts on embodiment, which of course everything can swing, blah blah blah, so for sure. But I think that it almost sounded like to me, and I think this is a good thing, because I'm a little fast and loose sometimes with some of these words, but when your dad handed you that journal and you embodied his pattern, his example, which honestly is an example of Christ of going off with the people were too much. He would go by himself or to the garden, like that pattern. It sounds like that was almost like a sacrament. It was something like God's real grace was given to you through that pattern. That's how I'll use that word, even though there's other ways I would use that word. But that's what I was hearing from that. And but that was almost like an embodied thing, and so much of what I think that I also had quite a bit of charismatic influence in my life, and there was just a lot of I didn't know how to ground my faith into practice in a certain way. Other than being a worship leader, which was that pattern, like with music. So,
which is its own thing. I mean, like that world. I don't even know what to say about that world, to be honest. The
I'm curious though.
the music, the worship music evangelical world is for me its own thing. Like in my like I don't know, you might still be in that too, you know what I mean? But the Elevation Hillsong, it's like its own, it's its own thing. I don't even know what to say about that, but even at our own church, and this is like, hopefully no one hears this and gets offended, but like even at our own church, it's like the worship team they're the worship team, and it's like, and they kind of are their own little body, if that makes sense, so with their own little pastor, and and so it's like I find that a lot of discipleship and discipline and embodiment does get sort of shuffled into like into the worship world, you know what I mean? That seems like the only way that you can go, you know what I mean? I even know for me in high school, I was on the worship team. I played guitar and things like that. So I don't know what you think about that, but.
Well, I do think that I have a lot of thoughts. I think I don't, because I was fired and then I sat in the pews for 6 years and I didn't do anything at a church. So other than, attend and, sing, and in our church for a while had some light liturgy that had been left over from what I was doing, but it continued to dissipate. I think that one of the reasons, like the crew at your church or any church that, you know, has kind of that model built up to that point, with like where there's a pastor leader that's overseeing like a group, I don't know, 20, 30, who knows what the number, that it is its own like discipleship. It is its own, I mean, I felt that way like when we would pray after rehearsals, like, and really cared about the people's
Absolutely.
needs, like that were in that kind of small group. And I was in a small group. So it's like, but there's a lot of embodiment from the worship. If you're the people leading, if you're singing and you're playing, or you're playing drums, or you're feeling your bass, like there's so much embodiment. It's a powerful experience. And so,
I've been up on that stage jumping around. Like I totally get what you're saying. Yeah.
So, but the part for me is like that's like 5-10 people or something a Sunday. I don't know what depending on your crew.
Yep.
And I do see the modern form as highly individualistic in the reception of it and consumeristic. Now that can be obviously different cultures and different things are going to be less and more of all that stuff. But I think as a pattern that even like I knew the impulse is to like, you don't want people to feel self-conscious. So let's put the lights down low. You want the volume up so that like, you don't really hear the people, because you want people to kind of get into their zone, and I don't agree with that ultimately now.
I don't either.
So
I don't either.
That would be the one thing, and that historical liturgies are designed through their, whether you're confessing faith or you're confessing sin or you're reading it back and forth. It, you know, growing up how you and I grew up, it is very awkward and fumbly and stuff when you try to introduce that into those spaces. I've done it pretty successfully, but like at a different context. But I believe there's a lot to hearing someone else say something in that space, and there being a relational, like an intentional relational back and forth. Now, does it feel emotive? No. Not generally, depending on where you're coming from. It is for me, but so do people have preconceived conceptions that would then block them from probably even being able to participate in a kind of not overly conscious way for a long time? Yeah. So that's like one whole side of it, as far as like being in a kind of, you know, your standard 3 or 4 songs in a sermon type of situation. And so
it's so
go ahead.
Yeah, it's so strange. Again, totally, I recognize that anything I say might be totally off base. I'm only speaking from my experience, and not knowing you as well as I knew Paul, I don't know what I would say that might trigger you.
I'll be all right. I'll be okay. You're just a light on a screen right now.
Right. There we go.
I don't have to figure out how to sing with you on Sunday.
Right. It almost reminds me of like when I've heard, you know, in different denominations, that only the priest gets to partake in the Eucharist, right? And it's like, kind of feels that way, because what participation do I have on Sunday worship? What option do I have to partake in that? I can lend my voice, but no one's going to hear me.
And the acoustic treatment is anti your voice, actually.
Absolutely. Or I can raise my hand, but barely anyone's going to see me, you know? And so it's like only I know that I'm participating. So is that even participation? I might as well be standing in a black box. You know what I mean? In like, I don't know. Like that's and I can be kind of
snarky, but yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I can be snarky, but and that's just my personality sometimes. But and so I don't even know how we got onto the worship side of things.
Well, embodiment. We were talking about Vervaeke's contributions to this conversation, I think.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So, embodiment. Right. Well, I find the most enriching time for me was my devotions, was my personal morning and evening. I would turn on my music. I would sit in the dark and I would bow my head and I would write my prayers, you know what I mean? Very closely, intimately. And that level of embodiment formed, I think for me, I've really only gotten more so into doctrinal theology questions since I went to Israel. And I think I shared in the Paul Vanderklay conversation, I had gone to Israel, and then a month later, I went to go work for a Pentecostal church, contract work on the other side of the country. And there's a lot that I could say, honestly. There were things I didn't know what you wanted to talk about, but looking at your videos, there were some thoughts that I had as well. Number one being the Pentecostal church, and we can just bookmark this or just let it go. The Pentecostal church, it was in like a shopping center, like what looked like a shopping center. And there was like another church, like in another like outlet right there, And I asked them, like, when we got there, I was like, oh, so do you partner with this church? And they're like, nah, you know what I mean? And so like the whole parish thing, you know what I mean? Like of the neighborhood and how we're like working together. I just thought that was really interesting. I was like, I don't know, for some reason I assumed that if another church is like 2 doors down from you, you've like talked to them. Yeah. And so anyway, I just thought that was interesting, but no shade to that church. I'm just bringing up my immediate thought when I had that. But yeah, it was after that I was being told that I was going to speak in tongues and all these things, that I was like, okay, I need to look up Calvinism. I need to look up tongues. I need to look up all these things. Cause like, I don't necessarily know where I land on a lot of these things. And that's like a more recent development for me. And so I didn't need to deconstruct, because for me, embodied relationship with Jesus was supposed to be the main thing in the first place. I hope that my memory serves me right, that's what it was, Yeah. So, I mean, one of my favorite hymns is called In the Garden. Do you know that one?
I know the title. I can't think of the melody off my head.
Well, it ties into so many different little things, but it's about you walking with Jesus in the garden, you know what I mean? And so it's like, but again, when we get to embodiment, when we get to ritual, when we get to all these things, I find, am I wrong to think that someone like Jordan Peterson, I just don't know what he thinks about, can he actually have contact with something outside of himself or not? You know what I mean? And I hope that message is not cutting through, that you can't, right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That like,
well, that was the power of his friendship with Peugeot.
Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of
that unlocked it, I think, quite a bit. And I still see him. I've talked to my friends about him as though he's the one who stands holding the door open for a building that he hasn't walked through the door yet, right?
Yeah.
He continues to hold that door open. I just wonder how long before he actually steps through,
There's the thing about that, I mean, whenever I was at Symbolic World and Jonathan was kind of telling some fun stories about Jordan going to, I guess they were in Israel together. They filmed some of the Gospel series or Exodus series, I don't know, but they were going into some of these, church building cathedrals, and he would light a candle, and the way Jonathan was describing it, it seemed like Jordan was still studying, like more scientifically, like, oh, you light a candle, okay? It's like, I'm going to contemplate what the psychological significance or whatever, and I guess that would be the, and again, like, so when I first was going full time at the church I had served at longest, back in like 2011, the pastor at the time, right when I got hired, as soon as I got hired, he said, I'm about to take a sabbatical, and because basically he was losing his faith. And a friend of ours, of like a mutual friend, I was talking, we were talking about the pastor, and he was like, his story's not over yet. And I was just floored by that. I don't know. It's such a simple concept, but people, hey, he's not doing this. And I mean, but it's like, what's it going to take, dude? You almost die. Your wife almost dies. But it's like, it might take it might take his life. I don't know. I'm not. We want these things, but that's kind of been my frame for a lot of things that I've remembered now as in different friends and different peoples and different journeys. It's like, oh man, I used to think it was like, oh my gosh, if this doesn't happen when I think this should happen, then it's never going to happen, or he's just not. So
Yeah.
I agree with your framing on that, but also just that his story's not over, and
I agree.
might it take his platform imploding or so? It could take
Yeah.
all sorts of things, and
Yeah,
I don't wish that for him actually.
Yeah.
But the the other piece that you were talking about with your personal embodiment, I think one of the language that Jonathan offered that has been really helpful for me was to understand that it seems like what you were is, well, you have like these, he uses fractals, like you have the individual and maybe the family, and then maybe the corporate church or community, and then the church, like these kind of fractal realities, and like the desire for those practices and that relationship to kind of line up with more symmetry than I think we find sometimes, and especially with the contentious nature of however we define corporate church worship versus like this kind of fractal of individual worship, and like you want these things to line up. And so I think that the corporate worship is not for the individual. Like I think one thing, like what we used to do at my old church was that we had done when I'd worked there, and for a while after when I was just attending, was we would do like a confession of sin one week, we do the creed the next week, and it's a non-denom. And I remember getting upset after I came back and I would do that corporate confession of sin. I would be like, after I had confessed so much of my personal sin to people I had sinned against, like namely like my wife and a few other people, but it was like, this isn't enough. This needs to be people need to be doing this, because I have real like this power, and I've come to the place where I'm like, well, I don't think that's what this actually is for. I think this is a fractal of what should be happening individually, but we acknowledge it corporately, and it's also as a witness. So that's like one example, where, or say you are confessing your faith or you're sharing your faith like onto a person, or practicing, but like when you confess a creed corporately, you're not trying to convince the other Christians in the room like that,
Right.
but you're doing it together. And so I think those are just small examples but that I think that it's supposed to be happening, from my opinion, as a fractal from the individual. And you could say like individual liturgies, and then like corporate liturgies, and then civic liturgies even. But
yeah.
so,
Would you say, man, there's so many directions. So let me tie a bow around
go for it.
Jordan Peterson thing real fast. All respect to him. I all credit where it's due. I think to answer your question, your original question, right when we started an hour ago, was what place do I think, you asked me, does someone like Jordan Peterson's way of talking about things have in the churches, in the mega church, evangelical land? And all I was trying to say is the patterns, yes. The archetypes, the manifestations of these patterns, yes. This is what will happen in your life. The build a Jacob's ladder, for me, he might as well be saying build a Tower of Babel. That is my opinion. So there you go. And I just want it to be not that, if he's going to be claimed in this, in evangelical space, if that makes sense, as like, this is our guy, so, because I think it will confuse a lot of people. And at our church, this might offend people. We are one of those churches that almost, like, my dad in particular has a habit of using the word religion like it's a bad word, right? based off of what he means, I understand and I agree. And what he means by religion is Pharisaical, I do, and Cain-like,
Mhm.
I do things because I want what I deserve,
Yep.
essentially. And I'm going to earn God's favor, and I'm going to beat my, beat my chest and say, "Oh, I'm not like those sinners over there. Look at all the things that I've done, and look at all the practice that I've put in, and things like that. And look at the ladder that I've built. Look at and I know that that's like one of the root messages of Jordan Peterson's message is the Cain and Abel story. You know what I
Yep.
mean? And so
Yeah.
it's almost ironic, but because
Mhm.
even I've been thinking about Cain and Abel, and I've been thinking about the idea that Cain's sacrifice is, um, as Jonathan Pageau puts it, an artificial sacrifice.
Mhm.
It's a sacrifice. It's literally a sacrifice that he builds for himself as like a fake thing. You know what I mean? Like he brings a sacrifice that is, and it's representative of the city. It's this thing that he builds and thinks that it's worthy just because he built it. You know what I mean? This sacrifice all of this stuff that he put in, he deserves recognition. He deserves to get what's his. You know what I mean? And that's the Jordan Peterson message too. And it's
Mm.
almost and I Jordan Peterson's message was against that people have resentment because they do a lot and then they think that they should get a lot, but sometimes
Yeah.
they don't get a lot. And I just think I'm wary of the idea of, okay, you ascend the ladder yourself and then you'll get there, you'll reach nirvana. And so that's my bow tie around that. If that makes sense.
That's
Uh,
the several 5 or so 6 years out ultimate critique versus the critique versus the constructed or
mm,
things that have been helpfully constructive. So
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
I don't know where again, I think he's amazing. And
Well,
I
I mean,
really,
I join you. I mean, that's obviously to use a really strong term, it's a false gospel, right?
mm,
You know,
mm.
but the
And that feels harsh to say that,
yeah.
it feels like
Well,
it feels hard.
here's what was confusing for me, that I don't know if this will help inform that, because I don't want to justify like what you're talking about.
Mm,
But here's what I can say to the people that he was speaking to, and I would say myself being one of them. Life feels like you're at zero.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Um, there's a little bit of a non-agentic something that happens within certain theological frames,
mm,
that it's like, I can do nothing good. I am a piece of shit.
mm,
I
mm-hmm,
am. And so what if you are like a piece of shit that doesn't believe you can actually do anything good in the world because you've messed up so much?
yeah,
And
right.
I think that is the question for me that he helped me with, was like, I had to figure out how to rebuild self-respect.
Right.
And
Mm,
without and it was based off of like working hard and having some small successes, like making an A on a test when I'm having to
yeah.
like start a new career. And so where sometimes uh that that's not me necessarily like trying to build a ladder up to God. It's like
Mm-hmm,
literally just trying to like exist healthily in the world. But
mm-hmm,
you can see that sometimes that, oh well, that's works based salvation, or that's he's uh those were the kind, because I guess in a different way, like I had a lot of theological precepts that would go through my mind because I'm like, I had some training, so I was
mm-hmm,
thinking these were the things that I was
yeah.
I would struggle with. And it's like, oh well, if I'm proud of myself for doing good on this test, that's a sin
Mm,
because I'm prideful.
mm,
But it's like, I have like no pride left. Like I don't
mm-hmm,
have anything, like this is like. And so in that frame, I think, people, he gets kind of framed as like the guy that was leading the incels out of, well,
mm-hmm,
like,
mm-hmm,
you know, uh,
yeah.
it for that's what helped me with whatever some of that framing is, of taking up your cross and picking up the biggest load you can. The responsibility thing sometimes, because uh the gospel message is like, you can't do anything, it's all Christ's work. You extrapolate that out into like, well, it's almost a little bit of a nihilistic endeavor to like, well, I can't do anything right, or I can't, it's like I might as well just give up.
I see the critique, but I see the critique of, I almost like kick against the idea that like the gospel message, that is all that the gospel message is like, and I don't necessarily like even that framing, and I hope I'm not even framing it that way, if that makes sense. I hope I'm not framing it in the sense that, and I had this exact same conversation yesterday, about the idea of how wrong it is to, the total depravity mindset, that there's nothing good that I'm capable of, and anything that I appreciate in life is bad. And, like that sense that like everything is wrong. Everything, like I can never engage in common grace, if that makes sense. I think that that's a false gospel too, personally. And that's my sense of it. So I appreciate that aspect where you're saying like, he helped define what it means to like have a healthy self-respect.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He helped carve a pathway out of a pit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of
Well,
self.
and that kind of like that conversation, like a personal hell, that held
Right.
in a sense, like, and then this goes back
Hell
to like
is your
that
own making type of thing.
Well, it goes back to kind of that fractal, or even Lewis's like allegory with the Great Divorce, but it's kind of hell is only a place that you go to beyond this life, or could in a certain way, can it start here? Can it start now? Can you be
Hell begins with a grumble? Is that
maybe something, and like I had created a pretty devastating existence, and it hurt and it damaged a lot of people and myself too. And so those were things that he was putting language to in a frame outside of the theological frameworks that I had to work with related to what's going on. And because some of it's like, I mean, dude, or like, even though when I told the truth, when I confessed the truth, even though that was freeing massively, my world was still in shambles. And so having like, it was still, that was like the first step, like out of hell. But though it was, putting it into more of that framework as opposed to like, everything still wasn't okay. There were still terrible nights. There were still awful, grueling experiences. But, there's sometimes like this culture and certain like bypassing, like, it's like, well, I mean, forgive and forget. And then, you've got Jesus and everything's going to be okay. I'm like, well, I don't know if everything's going to be okay. Like it's a one step at a time. And so sometimes, again, like these kind of colloquial isms and stuff, that there was language, I feel like that he helped shape for me on a path that was very beneficial. And there were a lot of other things. There were other people in my life, but I think that's what's complicated about some of the those kind of pragmatics. I think were helpful. Psychological, certain even biblically framing pragmatics were helpful. So,
absolutely, yeah.
So again, I'm not arguing with your point though. Like I don't feel like I am. I hope you don't feel like I am.
No, I don't. I'm almost arguing with myself. I hopefully I am. I never want to come on too strong. I mostly have been trying to figure out how to answer your initial question, I think.
Well, you've done, I mean, I feel like it sounded like one of the answers was already that just that you teach often at your church. And so that's part of it. It's just like happening.
I think the effect that Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Pageau, I literally had this thought yesterday, I think, that they are already starting to be, and this is not even manifest, but they are already starting to be the elder class to a new and up and coming generation that is all going to take what they have done and run with it.
Well, yeah, it's been baking for 7-8 years, like
Yeah.
almost a decade, and now it's starting to break. Like this is, I feel like what I kind of do a little bit is like it's broke ground, it's kind of sprouted, and these guys were already kind of like, you know, trees or whatever you want to call them and stuff.
Yeah, I agree. They there will come a time in the next 5 to 10 years where we're going to be like, oh yeah, JP and Jordan Peterson, they were the start. They're
Yeah.
not present. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing. That's the normal
Pattern,
sort of generational development of movements of the internet and things like that. You know, at one point it was Tim Keller. At one point it was Mark Driscoll. At one point you know what I mean? Where like we've all kind
Rick
of
Warren, you mentioned Rick
Warren,
25 years ago.
We've all found
Purpose-driven life.
ourselves in these little spaces, you know what I mean, that we're on these journeys of cultural development, cultural engagement, conversations that are paradigm shifting. And so I think as long as people hold to, I just don't want to see people, this gets into the theologically liberal side of things. Like, I don't want people to get into like, it's an archetype and that's all it is, you know? Because I do believe in a real Jesus, a flesh and blood Jesus. Like, and that's the point of it's almost like for me, like that is the thing, like that's the incarnation and that's the thing.
Well, let me press you on that. Like, well, like, so within like the Christian traditions, like, so, because you use flesh and blood, Jesus, like sacrament versus ordination. And we're starting to talk about liturgy a little bit, but like, how are you, I mean, you were talking about, I don't know, that was what that kind of like poked at for me.
Yeah. Flesh and blood. Yeah. That's so interesting. I, being in a essentially non-denominational church, we're Southern Baptist, but Southern Baptist is not even a denomination technically. The investment in
the International Mission Board.
The investment of the actual convention on the control that they have over the local church is not great, right? It's not a great amount of control and power
in their polity.
We don't have we have a far more robust like baptism is our big thing, and I already explained that.
On Paul's.
And I bring it up all the time that our communion sucks. And that's like the word that's almost blasphemous that I just said that, but it does. Well, it's my dad. He's the one that said it. I just quoted my dad.
There you go.
Yeah. So
do you think that's something he's picking up? I mean, if he's saying that, like, what do you think where's that coming from him?
He has, interestingly, so I can speak a little bit about my dad. He grew up Assemblies of God. His dad, my grandpa, did like tent revival ministries, wild speaking in tongues type stuff in these tents with prostitutes and gang members on the streets of, in the very poor areas of our town and things like that. He growing up that way, though, has a more liturgical sensibility even himself, I think. We have talked at length about wanting to have art in this is just me and him conversation. We have talked at length about wanting to have art in our sanctuary, in our church. That is, and I've asked him, like, what kind of art would you want? And he's like, yeah, I would like more old Byzantine style art. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm like, I agree. Like, that'd be awesome, And I think it's his appreciation of he has a master's in history and going to Israel. You just can't. Have you been to Israel?
I've not. No.
Okay. You just can't not appreciate the historicity of our world. And by our world, I mean the Christian world. With, if you go, and he's been to Germany and he's been all over the world. You know what I mean?
So he's seen the medieval and he's seen the
Absolutely.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And so it's sort of like, and when he said that about our communion, yeah, I think he would also agree, like, that we need more. We have the what on the internet is like considered like the worst kind of like communion,
On the internet.
Eucharist. Well, I've seen it, the
Yeah,
dunking on the little cups with the
yeah,
wafers, you know what I
yeah.
mean? I've seen the comments about those things, and yeah, we still have them. And I'm like, Dad, we got to get a bread baking ministry going on here, and we gotta do something like more important, because I find that's one of the doctrinal weaknesses, I would say, of our church. But like at our church, it's like there's always a lot. My dad is not a very like crackdown type of pastor, if that makes sense. So it's like our elder board is our pastors, and
Yeah.
it would have to be like a direction that we're moving in, and an agreement that we're all making to get, they're making together as an elder board and things like that, if that makes sense. So are you asking my theological opinion?
I just was curious. Well, just that, when we've hit on, history, meta narrative, but even then, when you start talking about like the incarnation of Christ, and then we start talking about the flesh and blood of Christ, like that's, and then we have like this big kind of critique of the modern worship frame.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that is kind of pointing to, so I had a conversation. Have you ever watched Karen Wong's channel, The Meaning Code?
No.
She's been a kind of a corner. She's got like 5,000 subs, and she's had on Vervaeke, and she's had on
I think I've heard the name in some of these videos, but
Peterson's wife. She's had on some like high science mind people. But when I went on and talked to her, what I kind of was framing was like worship telos, and something about like, even if it's not theologically sacramental, this goes back to participation, and how you approach something, whether it's psychologically, theologically, somewhat on an individual, but if the practice is similar of these other frames in a certain way, it's not arbitrary in how you attend to that. And to me, there's an opportunity for a type of relationship and understanding between churches that, not just theologically, the frames don't have to shift that much or shift at all to a degree, but if we struggle in the modern frame, and especially in the postmodern frame, for like reverence or sacred, like and if we had something, especially with the rock band, like transcendence all day long, but like sacred and reverence, I don't know if I would like normally say that that's like normative in those situations. And so, it's like coffee mugs and feeling comfortable. It's like, that's just not the same thing. So, but I think that there's a way in a lot across frames to attend to communion, and elevate it in churches where it hasn't been elevated for certain reasons, which are to a degree, I don't know. That's just something I think is possible. And it sounds like y'all are beginning, like at the early stages of having some kinds of those conversations.
I hope so. Yeah, we have with the coffee shop. We are also doing. I've mentioned the coffee shop, right? And yeah, we're also doing a farmers market. We're also doing a community garden. We're also doing, and I'm like, with all of the Living Temple study that my wife did. She just got her a degree in nutrition science, and like I want to move into an embodied, specifically in regard to food. And I keep saying, like, why don't we have a bread baking ministry at the church? Like, I think we had at one point. Like, why don't we have that? Because for me, and I'll just speak purely personally, like I'll speak from the heart and say that like I don't, and this is like sounds awful, and I like really love my church, and I really yes, I really love my church, and I hopefully represented it very well in my conversation with Paul Vanderklay. I don't necessarily feel like I have opportunity. This is awful, and it's like the worst thing that I could say about a church. It sucks that I'm saying it, but I don't really feel like I necessarily am like led to worship at my church. One of the reasons being because of something like the communion.
Led to worship.
Yeah, like worship is happening there. If that makes, like, people are going in there worshiping. I have for maybe a decade not felt, it's been challenging for me to participate in it, if that makes sense. Communion would be one element, and this is why I did say in Paul Vanderklay's thing, like, I probably would appreciate more liturgy, particularly when it comes to communion. The greatest thing about our church, I would say, is baptism, because there's so much emphasis put on the baptism. Like, there really is. Like, so much so that like my wife and I drove an hour north of us into the mountains to like baptize someone in a waterfall.
Yeah.
And I told my dad about it, and he was like, send us a photo and we'll like print out the certificate that we do for people. This is not even someone that goes to our church. They're an unchurched person.
Yeah.
And they're moving like out of our city. But it was like such, like, it's always, we have the resources, we have the celebration resources available, that it's like, send me a photo, we'll print out the certificate, we'll get it signed, like we'll do all this thing so that they'll always have it, their baptism, you know what I mean? Like they'll always have like,
well, that's pretty Lutheran. Remember your baptism.
Right,
Remember your baptism.
Yeah. And I mean, we're a Baptist church, so it makes sense. I want that on the regular.
Well, what's interesting about, I mean,
that's what communion can be, if that makes sense.
Well, did you said you baptized your friend? Is that what you said?
My wife did.
Your wife did. Okay, so the interesting thing, as I was hearing that, is because baptism is something that's generally performed by the clergy, or to some degree. I'm not really. That's not really the point that I'm trying to make right now. So don't hear that. I'm saying,
I know that when I said that, people are going to be like,
no,
scratching their heads. Yeah.
All I'm saying is that communion is participated in by everybody. And baptism is something that we can celebrate, but it's not something that we're like kind of participating in. You technically, in the sense of coming into something like the covenant body of the church, you could say you're participating in should be participating.
I will qualify, just to interject, at our church, everyone surrounds we do participate.
Yeah. Okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So
but that happens. I don't know if y'all have those services, or that's kind of
we have
extemporaneous.
People can get baptized every Sunday. We have baptism Sundays though, once a month, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's like,
so there is
surrounding there, and we're involved.
So that feels to you like worship? Is that what? That feels like you're participating in worship.
It's a story that I'm embodying, and I would like the communion to be more as well.
Because, and this is very interesting to me, because this whole worship music, contemporary worship music, like, isn't that supposed to be? I mean, I'm curious what feels like the disconnect for you on why that doesn't feel like for you personally, feel like you participate in worship.
I don't know. I have really, really sweet encounters with Jesus, normally in my car when I'm listening to worship music, and sometimes late at night when I'm listening to worship music, and I don't know why, and it might just be me, it might not be the church. I don't know why it's such a challenge for me in a setting where I feel like I'm at a concert.
Yeah. So that's
So
interesting, like the medium of like listening to it detached from the
I
performance
know,
of it.
yeah, yeah.
That's actually really interesting to me. That
Hmm.
because I mean, unless you're watching the music video, but like if you're just like playing it Bluetooth or whatever,
Yeah,
like
I can't watch the music video. That turns it off for me. Yeah,
okay,
yeah. I can't watch it happening. Yeah. It's probably my problem, to be honest, that I'm
well,
describing.
I mean, listen, dude, I mean the design the the design of the modern church is rock amphitheater. Like I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's just like whether from the stadium to the way that things are designed with the sound panels and
Hmm.
the stage. And again, there's like nothing generally. I mean, the move too has been to move away from like motion backgrounds, to like black and white, simple,
Hmm.
which is I think is fine. It's not like a move of iconoclasm. I think it has to do with what people thought is like distracting or whatever.
Hmm.
Generally, however, a lot of times like on the Instagram versions of looking at the modern church, like a lot of what the backdrop is some like it's all very abstract. Like the
Hmm.
imagery,
Hmm.
light, color, it doesn't feel like it's connected to like the symbols of Christianity, I think.
Hmm.
And I think
Yep.
that and so what are you left with? Like, well, I'm looking at these people and I'll even go on as far to say is that aren't wearing some kind of vestment that's like
Hmm.
identifying them, which I don't want to get like crazy like that, but for some people to be like, well, preach Christian, but like,
Hmm. Hmm.
but what I'm trying to say is like there is a psychological, I think, some people I'll close my eyes, I'll turn it off. Okay, then you have that something like the similar thing,
Hmm.
but
Because of the words primarily.
yeah, so you need the word, so
Yeah.
you're like you have to kind of like engage that
Yeah,
way.
yeah. Yeah, I think I had a thought, and it is maybe it's my own brain, but I think I'm easily influenced by the setting of it being a rock concert setting. And the fact of the matter is, like, if I go anywhere else that is a setting like this, it's not about me. It's about the other people doing awesome things. You see what I'm saying? And like if I go to a rock concert, it's like, look at how awesome
Yeah. That's
that
the
rock
purpose.
stuff
That's
is.
the purpose of it, right?
Right.
That's its intended purpose.
Yeah, you could say that is the telos of the rock amphitheater,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yeah.
And
To amplify the rock show.
the rock show. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when we were in Israel, there were a couple of different times that we sang in churches,
Mm-hmm.
just our voices.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, that's the stuff. That's the stuff,
Mm.
if that makes sense. If we're
Those
talking
Church
about
of Christ had it right all along. What the heck?
I'm not honestly.
What the heck?
And I'm trying not to. I I reverently respect my church and where I come from, and I tried to represent that in my last conversation. This is a particular thing for me personally.
Well,
Uh,
I think it's coming down the pike. I think it like, I mean, it's, you know,
It wasn't. Here's the deal. It wasn't just our voices. It was our voices reverberating in the in
yeah,
the
how it
church.
was designed.
Exactly. It
Hmm.
was designed for our voices to, in unison, sing a hymn,
Yeah.
right? Um, yeah, it was excellent. So, anyway.
Well, the question is the music serving that? I think that's that's part of the question. And so, um, and I'm still going through some of that stuff, when those moments, like we're talking about, like if you have readings, that's the voice as well, if it's corporate readings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the other part is something I've been working with, continue to is these kind of these really old refrains like the Kyrie eleison
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
the doxology or Gloria Patre and one of the really beautiful ones my wife grew up singing was a section of Psalm 51 that we do sometimes after the confession, which is create in me a clean heart. And she was raised Lutheran. And so that, like, and these things are completely a cappella. And sometimes even with, if it's just the person singing and you're kind of listening to the voice of the person doing it, when it's just the voice, again, there's something, the quality of that does something different than all of worship being, and I would say even to a degree, like with traditional hymnody or even modern pop sensibilities, if every song is kind of like in that, there's not really like a any form to it. It's almost like this, where I don't know. Those are just thoughts.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, and I feel like I'm trying not to be so opinionated. I'm just trying to just express sort of.
You're talking to a very opinionated person.
Okay, yeah, I try not to. I want to be. I'm always trying to be as charitable as I like. This is my church. I'm not trying to talk bad about it. I'm talking about my personal experience.
Yeah.
So
and I don't even know the name of it. I don't want to know the name of it, but so it's like very, it's not personal for me. It's like you're saying, it is very personal for you, and that for lots of reasons. And
yeah.
But we're in an interesting time. Like the biggest moment at Passion last year was the Agnus Dei.
Yeah, I remember I remembered that online, and I remember you mentioning that. I remember it circulating, and I was like,
yeah. And then there was also like, I watched Brooke Fraser. She was working on a chant project. I haven't seen it come out, but at one point she was actually working on like some chant from the Psalms. And, of course these things can be kind of just like creative garnishes, but I still think they speak to something that's real, that's happening. So hopefully it will continue in a certain way to manifest that way, man. Well, dude, I have really appreciated this conversation, and I'm glad that you came off right out the bat. Like you really, like you handed it right back to me. It's like, all right,
I know. I'm sorry. I was like, should I not do this? I just was trying to clarify.
That's all right.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Did you have anything else, last things you wanted to hit or share about what's been going on, or wrap anything up?
Yeah. Well, I appreciated you asking me on a lot because I enjoy. I have enjoyed the TLC as a peripheral watcher. You know what I mean? I have not, when we're talking about participation, I've not really participated. I've commented anonymously a couple times on some of Paul Vanderklay's videos, but I've seen you show up. I've seen other folks show up. And so it was encouraging and beautiful to have a couple people comment at least on that, responding to the things that I was saying that I have listened to. So it was like kind of strange to see that, and then have folk like you reach out. So that was awesome.
Yeah, the thing I would say is, like, when I started to participate more, I felt like I was participating in something that had almost existed in my head for a very long time, and I think it's important.
Yeah, I most of the things I talked about with Vanderklay were like responses that I had in my head to some videos that he had done, if that makes sense. Like if I could speak to you now as you're speaking, as he was speaking in my head, I was like, these are the things I would say. You know what I mean? And so I, first of all, thank you so much. I'm curious, like, where do you see conversations like this? Like, what part do they play? And like, when you post that video of you driving around your town, like, what for you is the goal of that?
Is to get it out of my head.
Okay.
I mean, I think because sometimes those things, and because I think, like, I feel like I have something maybe that I'm saying that's, I mean, it's born out of all this formation that we were talking about, and now it's kind of landing in real life, and it's fun to not be, quote unquote, alone in that journey to a degree. Like, even though I do, like, it's real life is harder than internet life. Like I said, you're like, I don't want to, like, trigger you. It's like, it's going to be more hard for you to trigger me through the screen than somebody than something I'm having to deal with like day to day, like that so I think that's the temptation is sometimes is to stay in this place instead. And different people are coming at this from kind of different veins, and you've been like in the embodied space, and now you're kind of like, well, maybe it would be good to get some of these ideas out quicker than once a week at a Sunday school or with somebody that's kind of been on the same vibration for the last, half decade or so. So I think that's good. That's it's a encouraging thing, but making it like part of it is play. Part of it, there is like, feedback mechanisms of like, I don't know how it's better to say it, like positive reinforcement versus, dopamine, like there's like, I mean, that stuff's real. But I try not to get over, because my aim is not virality. My aim is like at the corner, and the corner is not really built for virality, but it is something that you can get engagement with some of this stuff just like this. And so, yeah.
My other question is, what would you say like church is?
Church? I think that church is visible and invisible. And sometimes we get stuck on one side or the other. So it's like, well, the church is just whoever the true Christians are, and the church can happen in a field, and the church can happen in I don't know if but then I would say, then it's like, well, church is only at the building, like, it's only there, primarily there, or only there. And I'm like, well, I think again, like this fractal nature, but I am leaning into here on earth, build your kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. And I don't only see that as a spiritual endeavor. I see it as that matter matters as a part of God's creation. And that if it's only spirit, then it tends to lean towards kind of a Gnostic type thing. And so, I don't know if that answers your question.
It does to a certain extent. Yeah. You and I are in total agreement there. I on visible, invisible, matter matters. I'm all about that. Yeah. That's great. I think I'm even mean more so like, what do you think? Because in your parish video, when you were driving around identifying the different places, that was really interesting for me. It brought up a lot of different thoughts, because you came into, I think it was your church.
Yeah.
And you're like, this is a place for this. This is a place for ... for blank and blank and blank and blank, peace, reconciliation. I think of flock. I think of all these things.
Yeah.
Right? And so a space, a lot of that depended on, a lot of the things that you said depended on the space itself.
Yeah.
I would say, like, you could feel the things that you were describing as you were describing them. You see what I'm saying? Like, this is a place for peace. This is a place for the person standing up here at the pulpit can see everyone. You know what I mean? Like, there were things, and I like, not every church is that. You see what I'm saying? And so it's like, what is church supposed to be? Is that the ideal? You see what I'm saying? Is that like, is that just one among many ideals that the church can be, right?
Yeah. Well, the sanctuary, I think that question again is like, so ecclesiology, I guess, would be this is the theological question that we're dancing with, but it's, we did this particular church met in a basement for 2 years. And so, and I would say it wasn't like,
okay, so the church that you're talking about met in a basement?
Yeah.
The same body?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so this building that we're using it still is technically is a Church of Christian Science.
Oh, wow.
They have 4 people left. And and so we were looking for we had hired a pastor, and we were looking for a real place, like a building. It's not where a church consultant would not tell us to have done this. I'm happy. I'm really pleased to be there, because I have certain things that I think are important that are kind of countercultural, but there's really like zero parking hardly. It's like it's on a block and there's like two sides of that block that you can like park. Like it's like 20 cars or something. I don't know. Only seats 150. Very minimal room for Sunday school. So I mean, it's not like this perfect thing when you like, oh well, we need this for like if you have unlimited options or whatever. But your point about worship is really interesting to me as somebody that I still lead the worship, worship leader guy. I mean, I don't, it's volunteer, but, so what is the church? What is it for? And I am moving less from, well, the church is a community of believers to the church gather, like what's happening on the Lord's Day when we come together is for the main thing that we should really get our minds for is that this is for the worship of God. But I think a lot of it, especially is about, no, this is where I come to get my teaching. So if that's the telos of then.
You're saying that's how a lot of people think about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've got to come get my, and that's a very Protestant thing is, this expository preaching and that kind of thing. And so I'm coming here to learn about God as opposed, if that's your primary purpose to come versus I'm coming here to worship God. And those, not that there isn't a part of worship about like receiving the word that I think is definitely real and is very important. I just think that I think like I'm almost like I'm coming, to receive a transcendent experience or I'm coming to get some knowledge I kind of am pushing against that as what I think is good for church.
So you're saying church is meant, the purpose of church is an offering as opposed to a receiving. Is that what you're saying?
Say again?
That the purpose of church is an offering as opposed to a receiving?
It's both, really.
Yeah.
But because I think that is we are receiving like Christ is coming down. Like, I mean, and we do, one thing that we aimed at, I pushed for this, but it wasn't a fight or anything. It was just, everyone agreed, but it was like, we do weekly communion. The relationship with the pastor that we had, he was already Presbyterian. I'd worked with him previously when we hired him back in this community. He actually moved out to California. He was in Merced up in the Bay Area, I guess. But there's like their sacramental and their theology and Presbyterian theology and stuff, but that's a big learning curve for many people that are involved. And and for me, when you ask me the question of like, what is church? Like, it's it's more than just the works, because I do think the community and the share, like the Acts, and they shared all things together and they prayed for, like, it's not just that thing, but I'm hopeful that it's difficult to actually make church about the worship of God. I feel like it's easier to make it about these other things that I think should come down from that. Like it's more about it's community is the telos of church, or helping the poor is the telos of church, or winning the culture war is the telos. Like those are the things that I think that we get. They're lesser parts that the or even just me having a transcendent experience is the telos of church. So no, I do think the worship of God is the purpose of church. And so, and then from that, the
purpose of life.
Yeah. So
the purpose of church has to be the purpose of life, right? I mean,
so, well, but and I happen to, a lot of people use words like style, taste, and preference, and as if everything is kind of in this postmodern relative sense of that the forms of the way that you do things. Well, I mean, so-and-so has that style. That's just their style. That's just their preference. That we can't have an objective kind of belief that maybe one thing actually does something different or more helpful in achieving that. And so that's kind of also some of my thoughts on that. But
yeah, I asked the question out of the stuff that you sent me, I think.
sure. Yeah.
Because of when you sent me that stuff, I used it sort of as my gauge for maybe how the conversation would go and stuff like that.
Well,
And so I was just curious as to how you
I hope
respond to that.
it's gone well.
Yeah.
I have to go fix a car. I've been
Okay.
informed.
There you go.
Speaking of incarnated life. So
no, I appreciate your time. We've talked for.
Well, I thank you for yours because I invited you on here. So hopefully, but
yeah, I hope that I didn't step on anyone's toes or anything.
You didn't step on mine.
Okay, cool.
I think it's in the words of Matt Cross, it's probably good content. So we'll see how it goes.
We'll see. We'll see. Yeah.
All right, man. I'm gonna pause it. We'll end this thing backstage.
Okay.
Midwestuary 2025, August 22nd through the 24th in Elmhurst, Illinois. A weekend you won't want to miss with special guests Cale Zeldin, Paul Vanderklay, Rod Dreher, Elizabeth Oldfield, John Vervaeke, and Jonathan Peugeot. Midwestuary 2025, the Fellowship of the Spirit. Stay tuned for more details. Visit us at midwestuary.com for ongoing updates.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.